Ready?
Yeah, we're going.
This is the INKPULP podcast.
Look at that, dude. You're so classy. Hello, everybody. It is the 17th of November. Do you care that we say that the dates, or do you play these out of order?
No, I play them in order. I don't care about the dates. That doesn't bother
You
me.
do. All right. This is 17th of November, 2022. It's me, Eric Canete, with your host, Shawn INKPULP Crystal.
That's me.
I didn't forget your name. I just wanted a dramatic pause right in there.
Yeah, I didn't know if
How you doing, pal?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good. How's the work coming along? Do you have a set of butt wipes on your desk right now? Okay, listen. I got to give credit where credit is due. I can't remember which show it was, but I think you and I were rooming with each other.
Yeah.
And at one point, I was sitting in the bathroom and I happened to look over at your toiletry bag, and sits there. By the way, this is not sponsored. So, sits there is, what is that? The Dollar Shave Club.
Yeah.
What's
One
it
wipe
called?
Charlie's.
One wipe Charlie. So I was sitting there going like, what in the hell? This guy's walking around with his bag of butt wipes.
Hell
And so out of
yeah.
curiosity, typical, very on brand for me, I screamed through the bathroom door, trying to make fun of you, giving you a bit of grief for having those. And
And what
it
did
was
I
one of
say?
the first times that I heard you say, like, you don't know what you're missing out on, man. That stuff is freaking amazing. So out of curiosity, I
Mhm.
tried it out for myself. It's
Yeah.
minty, right?
Yes,
There's a
definitely.
mint component to it.
Yes.
There's a tingling in my butthole.
Yes.
It was a pleasant sensation,
Yes.
and also left me feeling clean.
Uh,
That said, if you are a representative from Dollar Shave Club and you would like something like that to speak very highly of your product, two dudes at a comic book convention screaming through the bathroom door,
Yep.
wiping their butts,
With
please
a
reach out to
a fresh
yeah.
ass mint.
Please reach out to Shawn Crystal. We'll be happy to plug your product anytime. All right, what are we talking about? Last week I was sick. We had everything raring to go, and I said, "Hey, Shawn, you're gonna have to carry because I'm feeling a bit under the weather." And we
Right.
tried to fire up the machine. My camera refused to work. I found out why, by the way.
Why?
And everything is running through a hub, and if that hub is underpowered, which mine was, right? Then the computer doesn't recognize that there's a camera hooked up to it.
So is everything running through a hub because these new Macs they have very limited USB-C. It's not even USB anymore. It's USB-C space, right?
Yeah. Well, they have both, but in the setup that I have, I think I'm maximizing whatever is available, and so I've gotten to the point now where I need to have this USB hub to help
Yeah, I have it
supplement
too.
the situation there. So, yeah, you really have to be mindful about any and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, as I was saying,
that's the downside of. Do you like the
what's that?
USB? You're a fan? I know it's
Of
faster.
USB?
USB-C.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it took forever and a day to finally get here. I'm not a fan of the previous USB interface because, first of all, I mean, I know it's a small inconvenience, but in a life that the posh, very soft life that I've built for myself, very provided for life that I've built myself, the extra half second that it takes me to flip over the plug because I plugged it in incorrectly
Okay, that's
is a massive inconvenience for me.
Right.
But primarily, I just like the fact that the USB-C is better designed, and primarily for the better design, not necessarily because of performance, but obviously performance is thrown in there too. It's so much better off by way of data and by way of.
I wish all the accessories would catch up.
Yeah, I would think just across the board, it's an expensive endeavor. On this iPad, there's a USB-C charger or a USB-C port, which is brilliant, right? And yet, in the same sort of like, Apple/Mac ecosystem, iPhone still has the Lightning cable, which is weird to me that they did. Like all of their computers have it now, and it's weird that it's the last holdover. And I've heard all the reasons, and I suspect because it's the one of the more expensive things to switch over. I think it's not a matter of like if. I think it's a matter of when.
Yeah, I would guess that too. But I'm talking about like Wacom and Epson and like to have like my scanner and my Cintiq and all these things be able to just plug in with the new technology would be nicer.
Yeah, again, it's a sweet, soft, comfortable pillow-like life
Yeah,
that we are living now. That we're sitting here talking about like plugs and
true,
scanners and printers and whatever. All right, so
true.
here's
But
something
the
that's
new computer
interesting.
is good. You're happy.
Um, I'm incredibly happy to give people some context. I invested in a high end, if not top of the line. I can't remember now because it's been a
Pretty
while.
top of the line.
Pretty high end version of the Mac Studio, and because uh, I'm I'm soft, right? I decided to go away from the PC Overlord version and decided to go to Mac, and I'm very very happy. I know I paid that Apple tax in order to get into my home, but I really like it. I like it.
Yeah, I like Mac.
There's very few things that are inaccessible to me because I live in a Mac ecosystem.
Yeah, I went when I was always Mac, and when I started my first teaching job, it was all PC.
Yeah,
So I switched and I spent 1 year on a PC and I just went right back to Mac.
yeah.
And I haven't had any like really issues with having a Mac since then. What did you do for monitor? Did you stick with the Apple monitor or did you go?
Yeah, I forget what it's called. I think it's a studio monitor on this
Mhm.
side. I have a dual setup now, and there's a Samsung monitor on this side because
Okay.
I couldn't convince myself to buy, and it's easy enough to look up. I couldn't convince myself to buy two $1,500 monitors.
Yeah, I was gonna say you don't need two Mac monitors.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
will
Now,
do.
if I was like rolling, you know what I mean? If I do kids still say that? What do the kids
Roland?
say?
Yeah, that's
What's the term for when the kids say I have a lot of money? Is it still rolling? I think that's my
I mean,
generation.
Roland's universal. It might
Okay.
maybe it's a little dated.
Yeah.
Stacked might be a more recent one.
I'll stay with Roland
Okay.
because it's what I grew up on.
Okay.
But yeah, if I had more money accessible to me at that time, I would have invested in two, but I didn't really see the point. Especially if this one
Yeah.
over here is just going to be, as far as performance, going to be good
Yeah.
enough for me. And I think that's what people have
So
a
the
tendency to
kids would
forget.
say you got one monitor dripped out and the other one not so much.
I hate the idea that number one, that's a term that they use, and number two, it came out of your mouth.
You don't like drip? I like drip. That's a nice word.
I can't stand
Well, do you know where it comes from, Eric?
it. I'm debating whether or not to answer or just to like move on to, okay, go on. Yes, no, Shawn. I don't know
Let
where
me
does it
tell
come from?
you.
Yeah, yeah.
It came from the hip hop world
Mm.
where having diamond encrusted jewelry
Uh,
was very it showed your status.
you say jewelry like my wife says jewelry,
How do I
which
say it?
is jewelry. Jewelry.
Jewelry. What are you talking about?
Say it again. For the people, by the way, for those of you who are going to end up watching this, leave a comment in the comments section if you can hear Shawn pronounce it freaking weird. Say it again.
Jewelry.
All right, you said it that time. I was going
That's
to
how
say
I
like,
always say it.
no, you said it differently like the first
I
two
might have
times that you
stumbled
said
on
it.
my tongue. I
All
got
right.
a fat tongue, and sometimes
Like
that
jewelry, your religion plus jewelry. You know what I
right,
mean?
exactly. So
All right, go.
the diamonds became known as water and or ice. Let's start with ice. That was the
Okay.
older term. Ice turned to
Mm-hmm.
water, but when ice
Yeah.
melts, it drips. So when you
Yeah.
have a lot of diamonds, it's a lot of drip. And then that just became anything fancy was drip.
Yeah. I'm really glad I followed up with you on that of where the history of that
You know
term
what?
comes
The
from.
listeners are gonna love that one.
Are they okay? Again, one more thing I'm going to ask of your listeners. Can you please comment? Can you guys leave a comment below whether or not you quote unquote loved that little, Snapple lesson?
Let us know how drippy the podcast is.
So awful. All right. Hey, I got an interesting piece of feedback from my buddy John Moore. Shout out to John Moore if
I
he
got a
ends up
DM
watching
from
this.
John yesterday.
Yeah, he's a super good guy, and most importantly, he's a huge fan proponent of the show. He
Which
loves
I
our
didn't know.
interaction, which oftentimes it's just me like berating you for 45 minutes to an
Mm-hmm.
hour.
Mm-hmm. In
But
fact,
he said something.
go
He
ahead. Go
loves
ahead.
our interaction. He loves our chemistry. But
Uh-huh.
what he's not getting is he wishes, I don't know if he actually phrased it this way, but I kind of read between the line. He goes, not too much process talk between you and I.
He wants more inside
He wants
inside
process
baseball.
talk. So a good portion of me wants to tell him to go fuck off and go find process talk someplace else. It's the freaking internet. Go get your own. Go find process talk. But a part
Mm-hmm.
of me says, hey, I think that's something that we had. I think we were pretty explicit in saying that. Hey, sometimes we'll end up talking process.
Yeah, we were. In fact, when we first started talking about doing this, that was going to be the focus, was process
Yeah,
talk. But
yeah,
we just had so much fun going off topic. We rolled with it.
yeah.
You want to do a process episode? You want to
I
talk
mean,
some
for
process?
John,
Okay,
right? But I
for
expect him to
John.
give you like $150 super chat or whatever the hell they give people. Like
Sure.
go into Sean's tip jar and just put $150 there.
Cha-ching.
We can do process talk. Now the question is, what's the process talk that interests you the most? What's top of mind for you process wise?
Right now, I would say what I'm spending the most time learning is obviously painting. But what like my journey when I create an illustration now is very different than anything else I've approached. I've given myself the room and the freedom to discover as I go. Like I have been, as far as my comics process and all of my work up until this point, very much about figure it all out and then bring it to life.
All
Like
right.
figure out everything in the thumbnail and then, it's all figured out and done. With the
Yeah.
illustrations I'm doing and the color work I'm doing, um, I'm not really thinking about like the whole vision of the piece. I feel like I don't have enough mileage behind me to do that. So every
Okay.
painting for me is a journey of discovery as I add value and color. I mean, I
Yeah.
have a composition in mind and I have a
Yeah.
focal point in mind,
Yeah.
but I haven't I'm not spending time figuring out the palette that early on. So now that you work in color as well, I was curious your approach on that.
You're basically flying by the seat of your pants. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of color, yes, yes, I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've found success in it in that as I'm going, one color tells me what I need to add. It's
Yeah.
because it's still so new to me, and I'm such a like neophyte with it. It's a learning experience. I don't feel like I'm in a position where I could make these choices that early on and be successful.
Yeah.
But then part of me also feels like I'd be cutting out some learning if I did that.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. I remember when you and your editor were over here visiting, and we were shooting footage for one of the episodes for your website. Is it
Incalculable instruction.
inkpulpinstructions.com? Please go there now. Shawn is running a massive service for those who are interested in sequential art, in his journey as an illustrator, as an artist. His instructional stuff is really high end. I highly recommend it. I was sitting in one of his classes, what feels like only yesterday, but in reality is
Yeah.
actually almost a decade plus ago.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Shawn is a top-notch instructor. You're going to get a lot
Thank
of
you.
value for the kind of money that you're paying out. inkpulpinstructions.com. So I remember when
Mm-hmm.
you were shooting, when you came over with your editor. Are we allowed to mention the man behind the curtain by name?
Alan. Yeah, yeah, of
Alan.
course.
Okay.
I like to give
So
Alan a shout out whenever I can.
yeah, so Alan's brilliant. He actually was back when I was generating YouTube content. Alan was the guy that was helping me put it all together. And if there's a polish to be put on the turd that I pooped out, Alan's responsible
Did
for
you
that.
use a one wipe Charlie when you were done?
I did not. I did not discover that until much later. So I would send that footage to Alan. Alan would make it look brilliant. Now, you and Alan came over right around the time that my wife was painting this massive mural, and
Right.
because she's very specific about the end product. So this goes back to what you were talking about like a minute ago, which is like, you know you used to think about things in sort of like, hey, let me have a completely formed, congealed, you know, sort of like optimized and strategized idea of what I'm going to draw. My wife exists in that space. I think not necessarily because of lack of confidence, but because she likes knowing that it gives her handrails, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
gives her this feeling of safety that, hey, everything has been planned out. So she was painting this giant mural, and she was doing it in such a way that she painted it first digitally, and then we projected it onto the wall, and then there was like this giant grid on the wall and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in when we were setting it up, it wasn't mapping perfectly to the grid on the wall, you know? And it caused her some concern. It caused her, she was really sort of not distraught, but she was like, this sucks. She was really annoyed by the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, like, what's the big deal? You know, just kind of, you just need to get close, you know? And then everything else you can just do on your own and blah, 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 blah. And then she said something to me in front of Alan. We got into a pretty heated argument. It was an embarrassing, but it was interesting that she was saying, and at the end of the conversation, she said, so basically, when you draw, you're just doing a lot of things out of luck. From her perspective, it was very pointed,
She
as
was
my
talking
wife
this
can be.
about your work.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because I told her, like, not everything that I do comes out planned, turns out okay. Yeah. And then she says, like, oh, not everything that, so basically what you're saying, like, when you're doing that kind of stuff, it just comes out of luck. And I could tell she was goading, like she felt pressured and defensive. And so she decided to turn it back on me and be like, so what you're fucking saying is you're just lucky. Right. And, I looked over to Alan, and Alan just kind of gave me this look like, hey, I'm just a guest here. I'm not going to do anything. But I remember thinking to myself, and if I had extended the conversation, it would have gotten even more heated. So I just said, yeah, I guess it's lucky, But in my head, and if I weaponized that comment, it would be something along the lines of like, it's not luck, it's confidence.
Yeah.
Right. Which would
Mm-hmm.
then, if you read between the lines, what I'm saying is that you're not as confident as I am, so fuck up. All right. So, but that's not the point. The
Right.
point is, going back to your original thing that you had said, which is, I think a lot of people plan, if not over plan, it could be argued if that's true. A lot of people plan because they want to have the guardrails in place just in case. Because number one, it's what they know. Number one, it gives them a feeling of like safety and comfort that, not many things can pretty much go off the sort of like proposed path, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a version in which you go like, I have an idea of where I want to go, and I kind of have elements that I want to capture. And as long as I capture those elements, everything else becomes a secondary exercise and tertiary exercise.
Right.
Or, put simpler, I have the confidence to be able to recover because nothing I do is going to be so catastrophic
And
that
that's
it's like,
exactly what the transition I've made in the past 5 to 6 months, I think.
yeah,
Where
yeah,
because you're right. It was a confidence thing. I had to make sure I didn't have. I guess it was a lack of trust in myself to.
hmm,
If I don't figure it all out now, I'm gonna fucking fall.
yeah,
And now
for
it's
sure.
like I get my thumbnails to a place where like, oh, that's enough. And,
Yeah,
it's there. I see what I'm gonna do, and then as I go, it gives me the freedom to explore and push it towards this or push it towards that. But
yeah,
ultimately, it came down to me feeling like, oh, I trust myself.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
in the end, I'm gonna be fine, and it
yeah,
makes the journey for me much more pleasurable.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's a really great value in that. I think there's a level of profoundness in that sort of that sort of self awareness. I think, so if we're going to talk process, like for me, what's allowed me to sort of like, I always use this term where I'm like, oh, I stopped giving a shit, right? It's really less about that. That's, it's almost like a cartoonish sort of dismissive,
Right,
dirt off my shoulder kind of way of approaching things. I've overly simplified to the point of being cartoonish.
right.
But my attitude with every piece that I draw, whether it be black and white or in color, is I have a very specific but small objective within the exercise that is painting, right?
Right.
And rare is it about the whole thing, which is weird because some people will say like, oh, you've got to have an understanding of your background and your subject and your foreground and blah blah blah, and then it's about these brushstrokes and it's about like then it starts to become this giant thing that I'm lugging around with me, you know.
Right. Right. That's
It's like
exactly
I
how I felt.
drag this thing around. Are the brushstrokes right? Is the anatomy
Right.
correct? Is the lighting correct? Is the composition correct? Is blah 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 blah. So it's like it's a lot, right? And you've heard me. We talked about a long, long time ago. We've talked about like somehow maintaining focus on like three things of getting things done. That also
Right.
transfers to me whenever I'm like painting or going into a space where I'm not 100% comfortable with like what I'm doing. And instead of being holistically outcome based, and I know that's weird to say that. I'm only partially convinced that this is true. Rather than looking at the thing at the whole, which is like so many things, especially in an exercise of painting something new in a palette or like whatever subject that I'm not 100% comfortable with, rather than looking at the whole thing and say, is this whole thing successful?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a lot, right? I just listed off like 7 things. I could probably list off 7, 20, 30 more things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I often focus like in the thing that I'm painting. What is the thing that I wanted to get right?
Right.
Right? What is that thing that I want to get right? Whether it be the composition, whether it be the color, whether it be, and oftentimes it's a lot about like, how do I render that so it makes sense in my own head? And what I mean by that is like, if it's a two-dimensional object, how do I introduce a level of three-dimensionality into it that makes it look convincing, right? And actually has volume and form.
Yeah.
And my exercises these days, 80% of the time revolve around that in one specific area of the image. Everything else becomes there's no for me there's not even a secondary. Everything is all like tertiary. You know,
Right.
my
Right.
primary thing is like how do I land the idea that I know how to render this volume, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it holds up in value first and foremost. So that once I start adding color, there'll be some heavy lifting, but not as bad or not as heavy. And I think that's something that I can impart into people who are trying to learn something new, right? Is that in the whole thing that you're trying to learn, and make the problems small, make the challenges small so that it's digestible to you,
That's
right?
good.
Sure, you're going to mess up on 80% of the thing, 90% of the thing, but land that 20% and know that that was your mission in the first place so
Mm-hmm.
that you'll have that very specific metric of like pass fail. Because I think
Right.
when it gets too big, right, you take everything into consideration. Oh, I didn't land the lighting. Oh, I didn't land the way the hands work. I didn't land the way, oh,
Right.
this looks way too stiff in its posing and blah, blah, blah. That's a lot. That's a lot of plates. And you're barely trying to get comfortable. You're trying to get comfortable with all of it. So you might
Mm-hmm.
as well start like, hey, let me start off in this corner first, right? And if
Right.
there's something that I can pass on, so I can pass on to somebody who's brand new into the exploratory space of becoming a better illustrator. That's the one thing and I think this is pretty consistent in what I've said in the past. That's the one thing I could sort of impart on them is like make the problems smaller because it's such a big problem. And I use that term loosely, obviously, problem, right?
Yeah.
It's a bunch of keys that excuse me, it's a bunch of locks that you need to have you need to like develop keys for. And right now just focus on this main one. Focus on eyes, focus on skin tone, focus on, screw the pose, screw the whatever. Just pay attention to the thing that you're trying to get good at. There you go. Shut up, John. Here's your process talk.
We did it. We
Yeah, we
did
did
it.
it. Let's end the recording now. Let's get out of here. All right, so what's another thing that I've been paying attention to recently? I think, I'm in the business of currently, I've been in the business of drawing a bunch of different covers
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about
for
that in the
my
cards.
mini series, right? So for those people who don't know, I have a creator-owned book. I have a creator-owned book called Mark Athena. It is currently set to be a 6-issue mini series. I've released 2 books The third book is soon to be released on iconiccomics.com website exclusively. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that you can buy on the side with it, but it's going to be that way moving forward. The whole crowdfunding thing is just so exhausting to me, and especially considering my workload moving into 2023. It would be damn near impossible for me to give that effort the kind of energy it takes in order for it to be semi-successful. So I'm just going to
Sure.
release it.
What's coming in 2023?
Lots
Is
of
it
work.
is it like all stuff, or are you
Like
doing
work,
more?
work. Yeah, more work stuff. So like, whatever. I know that that's forthcoming, right? And so I'm like, I can't spend any time doing any of the campaigning. So I'm just gonna focus on releasing the books and getting them out there because I'm a huge proponent of just like consistency and having like
Mm-hmm.
books that are out there and available.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I'm doing these covers, and I've come to realize that some of the most memorable, I don't want to keep using the term iconic because that's like different, that's sort of like super subjective to people. There are
Sure.
some that like, so memorable I think is a bit more apt, a bit more sort of like accurate, because
Yeah.
you and I will talk about like, oh, do you remember, right? That's
Right.
often the term to be like, do you remember the cover that so and so did? And so
Right.
I think memorable is 100% applicable in this case. Some of the most memorable covers that I refer to going like, I remember that Jim Lee cover. I remember that Dark Knight cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
People attach the term iconic next to it, but definitely memorable.
Yeah.
That formula is a giant pain in the butt.
What
You
formula?
want to talk about like
There's a
puzzle?
formula for creating a memorable cover?
I think so. And
Okay, well, we'll break that down.
I've been trying to look for it, right?
Okay.
So here's a lot of crossover, right? Um, there's a lot of, as I'm looking at all of the covers that I like, from like Jock to Jim Lee to Adam Hughes to Dave Johnson, our good buddy Dave Johnson, even like somebody as deplorable as a Dan Panosian type, right? Like when they do the covers that are like standout, the ones that are memorable, here's a handful of things, right? Number one, it's a very simple concept. The simpler the concept,
I could see that.
the more memorable it is. By the way, I would love to hear from a bunch of different people who are watching this episode what they think, would stand as a memorable cover for them. Put the covers that you are thinking about, audience of the Ink Pulp podcast. Put the covers that you're thinking about through this metric and see if this metric holds up. If it doesn't, I invite you to go into the comments section and add to it.
Okay.
So one is the simpler the concept, and whatever it's a guy fighting a robot. It's Superman throwing a car. It's Spider-Man swinging through the city holding villains under his arms. You know what I mean? Those covers that we remember, right? The simpler the concept, the more memorable it is.
Sure.
Right? And the more graphic the concept, the more memorable it is.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Right? And what else? And then obviously, like, the more sort of what's the best way? And this is the broad one. This is also subjective, right? Like, the more engaging the concept. So you have to infuse it with a level of emotionality, or like something that immediately compels this like gut reaction to it. Like, for instance, the thing that's simple, graphic, engages an emotion. You know that Jock cover with like Joker made out of bats, right? Graphic,
Yeah.
right? Simple, compels an emotion. Like, you see it and you go like, "Gee, that's so visceral." This thing that I'm seeing whenever I take a look at it. I think one of the things that detract from a cover is all the art fart stuff that you and I are so like super attuned to. Like, oh, look how that thing was rendered. Look how, you know what I mean? Like, oh,
Yeah.
look how the way they rendered that gray. Look how they rendered that
Sure.
whatever it is.
Well,
I
let me
think
ask
that
you this.
counts. Yeah, go ahead.
Like there are covers that are everything you just said, simple, graphic, that are masterpieces or
Yeah.
memorable. But then there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of other covers that are
Yeah.
very simple. I mean, I might even remove the word graphic because sometimes there's not even a thought put to that. But that are just
Yeah.
throwaways. Like, what
That are
separates?
memorable?
Huh?
That are memorable?
No, not memorable.
Oh,
So
they're
what's
not
the
memorable.
difference between something that's simple and graphic and memorable and something that feels more throwaway? It's like this fine line there
Oh, for
where it's
sure.
oh, you've that's not for lack of a better word, like, that's not a smart cover, but that other one, like,
Yeah.
was. Like, what separates a Dave Johnson from, like, just some young artist who just does a simple little cover?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think if I were to answer, like gun to my head, if I were to answer like right now, if you're like if you're telling me, and what do you think? I would say craft, right? It's also in the polish and execution of those three things in combination,
Got
right?
it.
You
Okay.
can you can have a guy who understands those concepts, simple in its concept, graphic in its sort of like composition, right?
Mhm.
And then compels an emotion, right? A clearly easy to digest, visceral emotion compels that out of you. You put it into Dave Johnson's hands, and you're like, holy shit, that's freaking amazing, right?
Right,
But
right.
you put it into somebody's hands who doesn't have the handle on their craft, it becomes distracting, right? Because it doesn't there is this barrier to entry when something becomes also digestible. And oftentimes that digestibility is dependent, that barrier to entry is sort of like it keeps you at bay because of the craft level. If an artist doesn't know how to draw a human being, if an artist doesn't know how to do like, hey, that's a convincing perspective on that car that you're using as graphic element in the
Mhm,
foreground,
mhm.
right? Everything starts vying for your attention outside of the intended presentation.
Right.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
see a really, really good, think about like a really awesome Adam Hughes cover for Catwoman,
Yeah, I got the one in my head. I know exactly which
right?
one I'm thinking
Like
of, yeah.
you and I can like list like he has that book that came out, Cover Run. I don't even know if that's in print still, but if you can manage to get your hands on an audience of this podcast, please go do so. Right? Buy it used, but just buy it. Like you can run through that entire book and again run it through the metric that I just mentioned. These three things that I just
Mhm,
mentioned to you, right?
mhm.
And Adam Hughes captures it to a T. When it falters is when his covers get a tiny bit too busy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? Where you go
yeah,
like, oh, that's not as strong as this thing. And most people go, well, doesn't it also mean that the main character has to be in your face? Doesn't it have to be
yeah. Mm.
like, no, no, it just needs to read. It just needs to compel. Like it's a bunch of these different sliders. If
Yeah,
we only use the three sliders that I was talking about just now, all of those things in combination with each other don't have to be cranked all the way up to 100, but they definitely have to be present. Because an example that I was trying to look through again, going through the exercise of what I'm using the three things as a razor, I was looking through a ton of Otomo's covers for Akira,
oh, okay,
right?
okay.
And I was like, holy shit, that is really super smart when it comes to those three things that I just mentioned,
Right,
right?
right.
Easy to digest, like, emotionally compelling, very graphic, even though like people go like, oh, isn't there like a ton of rendering and sort of like noodling because of the nature of its presentation was manga, right? You're
Mhm.
like, not really, because at some point when you have enough noodling, it all becomes one giant shape,
Right, right,
right? It all becomes just like, oh, there's a block of windows over there, but that's a block, right?
right,
As opposed to like being a bunch of different windows. Oh, there's a lot of rendering in the sky or in the pieces of the city or like with debris that's flying around. Yeah, but that's still just a block of debris or that's like a compositional element. You know
right,
what I mean?
right.
And I think that still holds true. And so it's not about detail. It's not about having a character like immediately in your face, like punching at you, but it's got
Mhm.
to be smarter than that. And if, again, the sliders that you push left and right, in whatever percentages that you have, in my opinion, and in the mild, I'm being very generous by saying mild. In the mild research that I went through, and I was thinking about what makes for a good cover, it's those three things.
Okay.
Those three things in orchestra, I think, make for a really, really good cover.
So list
But
the three things
it
again.
needs the
It's graphic, simple,
graphic,
and their
simple,
emotion.
emotionally compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a yeah. Land those things with the caveat that you know how to fucking draw, right? Like that you can never. I don't think you could omit that from omit that from the
And
equation.
design. You gotta know how to draw and design. I think that's an
Sure.
important component too.
Okay, tell me what you think. Tell me your definition of design. What are you thinking about when you say that?
How you're presenting. So like you said, you have to be able to draw, but how you're presenting the drawing itself
Hmm.
is design. So, something as simple as, is it off center, right and center? Is there thought put? Like, I can think of like a cover where it's the drawing is nice, but it's just not interesting in terms of design. It's just right front and center, and not
Yeah,
engaging in any way.
yeah, yeah,
How you're leading my eye to said drawing, stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I see. So is that design or is that composition? Or is that are you
Yeah, I'm infusing the two together a bit.
yeah, yeah, because
Okay.
I think it's all like it's how how I think how you're referring to it is like how you sort of like design the cover by using composition,
Right. Right.
right?
Yes.
Because
Okay. Okay.
I'm trying to think of those really amazing James Jean cover. Actually, let's do something a little bit more abstract, right? When
Okay.
you see the Dave McKean covers for Sandman,
Okay.
all
Okay.
right, he's using this sort of collage approach
Mm-hmm.
to putting together a cover, but I think it still holds up to the razor what I was talking about previously, incorporating where you're coming. So it's not even that the but it ends up accidentally omitting or actually purposely omitting the part that we said as sort of like as a caveat, which is you actually know how to draw, which he
Right.
rarely did
Right.
in those covers. But
Right.
number one, they were graphic, they were simple, emotionally compelling, and to your point now, which is like composed, right? They were like designed in such a way where they're like, oh, they're actually sort of like it tears everything back to like, oh, that's super engaging. That's visually compelling,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Now, I think that's in that case, in the case of a McKean, that's almost like an outlier because rare
Yeah.
are mainstream comic books using that, and very few people can actually pull it off.
Mm-hmm. That's
I'm
true.
just talking about generally. I've like, I did something as generic as like the coolest covers on comics in 2020, whatever it is, the last decade. And
Mm-hmm.
every time, and mind you, this is all, what do you call it? The what makes it onto that list is very subjective, but independent of that subjectivity, I think there's a reason why people are so compelled to choose the ones that they choose. And it's because like it's been broken down. And I don't know, and like, I don't know in Dave's case, it'd be great to talk to him about this. But like
We should
I don't
have
know if
Dave
they
on.
oh, absolutely. Without Dan, I think would be ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like
don't
as
want Dave.
far away as Dan can be from the conversation.
Yeah.
Actually, Dan would be a great guy to talk to because, when Dan nails a cover, I'm like, holy crap, that looks so freaking good. But
Yeah.
what's great about Dan is because when he messes up on a cover, you're like, oh, that makes me feel even better when he messes up, you
Which
know?
he does a lot.
Oh, they are like a lot. Like his hit to miss ratio right now is like 1/40, 1/50. No, it'd be interesting to bring Dave and bring Dave on and have him talk about like what his thought processes are whenever he's designed, because he's designed covers since
So
forever.
many, but
You know,
yeah, and I
his
mean,
100 bullets,
just gonna
run
say that,
is just so freaking amazing. I looked those
mind
up
blowing.
online.
The best run, just the best consistent run of covers, unreal. Well, we
Yeah,
should, after we're done recording, send Dave an email and get him on the next one if we
yeah,
can.
and just just have him talk about his cover process, you know?
For
So
sure.
yeah, so for me, that's what it basically came down to as I was looking through trying to come up with these covers. And so another thing that I had also thought about, especially when it comes to cover work, is that, or at least I was asking myself, like, are these covers that are memorable that much more compelling because we have an understanding of who the characters are,
Hmm.
right? When you come up with this really, in my head, really memorable cover that Mark Silvestri did of Wolverine in like, I think it was like purple and green, you know,
The Brood
really
one?
not that one, although that one's pretty freaking cool too, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about where it's Wolverine sort of like crucified on an X shape.
Yeah. 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 Oh,
You know
the
that one?
Genoshan one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, is that compelling? Because I know that's Wolverine, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
like I know the character, I'm a longtime reader of the book. Oh my
Right.
gosh, what the heck is happening? I knew what happened in the previous issue.
Right.
It culminates in this one, or it expands on the cliffhanger from the previous issue.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if it's like, oh, is it because I know the characters? Because given the same sort of thing, right? Given the same sort of like idea, if it's a no-name character, would it be as memorable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total
Like,
sense. But I think there's two ways to look at that.
yeah,
One, if you're working on the X-Men, that's okay.
yeah, yeah,
You know, it is the X-Men. They are iconic or memorable characters.
yeah,
If you're talking about a new, like, creator-owned book,
yeah,
it's almost like a different criteria.
yeah. It almost. I was trying to decide whether or not it would be less impactful, right? If you didn't know the characters,
Yeah, and you made me
or
think
is that
earlier.
does that even factor in, right? Like,
Yeah,
who
you made
cares
me
about
think
that?
when you were talking about Adam and you were talking about emotionally compelling and simple, one of my favorite covers of his, and then we were talking about, do you need to put the character front and center? There's a Superman cover he did of, I think it's Martha Kent out in the wheat fields with their little house in the background. And she's very small. It's nighttime. She's holding up a lantern
Hmm.
and it's just lighting her up. And she's outside and the sky is covered in stars. And it, if you take away knowing that's Martha and this is Superman's home,
Yeah, yeah,
it loses like the emotional quality that I think I found in it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but again, I think when you're working with famous or well-known characters, that's a tool you can use. But when
yeah.
you're not,
But
I
go.
don't
Let's go
know that.
back. Let's go back one step. Omitting the fact that you know that it's Martha Kent and that's the Kent farm, and you know that's a Superman book, and somewhere in there is sort of like this unavoidable shadow that is Superman, right? Because that's the whole. That's why that cover exists, right?
Mhm.
Is it still memorable, right? Is it still sort of like, yeah, that's pretty dang cool cover. I'd put that on anything, or
For me
is it only memorable in context to Superman?
for me, it was memorable, and again, this I'm coming from a different perspective. For me, it was
Yeah,
memorable because it was 2 colors, and that orange was so warm and it lit up this tiny little area so beautifully. That's
yeah,
what I remember.
yeah, yeah. That's great. That's great. I have a huge affinity. I think if there is a if there was a if there was a time in comics in which it made me question whether or not I was going to be successful in comics, because I just like if people start in my head at the time, I remember the thought clearly, which is I thought like if people start catching up to this quality bar that this artist establishes, I I will not be able to do it. I just will not be relevant. I just will
Are you
not be
talking
able
about
to
Adam?
continue. No, I'm talking
Oh,
about Travis Charest.
oh, okay.
When Travis was drawing what he was drawing, right? Like at the level of like X-Men Wildcats, you
Yeah,
know
I'm
what I
just
mean?
gonna
Like
say that it's kind of the peak, right?
that like the bar that he established with that, but also but when he had his run on X-Men too, right? Or when they relaunched the Wildcats, like The
Mm-hmm.
guy clearly could draw. He wasn't much of a sequential artist, I don't recall. Right?
No.
His
Right.
panel to panel work needed a
It was
lot of
very confusing.
deciphering.
Yeah.
Yeah, needed a lot of deciphering. Needed a lot of how like you kind of needed to know how to read a comic in order for you to understand what Travis was doing.
And even then,
So
I remember there was a lot of like, wait, I got to turn back a page, and okay,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But that's only because like we kind of know how we know how the sausages are made, and we're such art farts about it.
right.
Like what is that weirdo shot? So it's not throwing shade. It's just like maybe it is, but completely by accident. And I say it out of like love and respect for the guy. But again,
Well, I
the
mean,
love,
I
the
look at
bar
it
that
this way: if
yeah,
like the amount of time he spent drawing that, if
yeah,
he had spent time and that amount of time and energy in trying to tell the story, it just wouldn't have
yeah,
ever been something we knew. It wouldn't
yeah.
have come out. I think
That's a
Travis,
good
I mean, this
point.
is a guess, I
That's a
don't
good
know him,
point.
but my
Yeah,
guess is his love of craft involves drawing more than
yeah,
anything, and that's where his
yeah.
energies go.
Sure, sure. And this isn't making an excuse for him, but like I don't think that was all that. I don't think it was all that valued in the space and time that he was in. It was just
Mhm.
like draw a freaking compelling picture. I remember,
Right.
and this is a sidebar. I remember like Aaron Weisenfeld drawing Death Blow.
Mhm.
In that Death Blow, what was it? There was like a barbarian or something like that, and I thought
Mhm.
like, God, again, it was like they were leveling up so much.
Do
But I
you
remember
did you
seeing
know did you work in the studio? Was Aaron there?
no, no, my time there was like way after the fact, way, way, way after the
Okay.
fact.
Do you know him?
Not
Like,
in
what
the not in the
happened to
con.
him?
He became a fine art painter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
he went into down. I think that he realized that the sequential art slash comic book industry wasn't a good fit for him, and
Okay.
or at the very least he had a better passion for doing fine art more.
Okay.
He left and did fine art for a while. And I remember seeing some of the pieces that he was generating after Wildcats Death Blow, and he had set up such a vaulted sort of like bar, that when you got to see some of the stuff that again, it was early in his fine arts career,
Mhm.
so he wasn't cranking out anything like my opinion only, but like he wasn't cranking out anything like super compelling because
Mhm.
and it's only due to the fact that you can contrast it to his comic book work
Mhm.
in that Wildstorm. What was that, like Wildstorm Presents or whatever that was back in the
Mhm.
day, that when you saw the fine art stuff, you're like, oh, what the heck? This is weird. But then it
Mhm.
was early. Like you see some of his stuff now, you could tell that he's like, oh, he's fully occupying that fine artist space.
Mhm. Okay.
Anyway, so I remember seeing Travis's stuff back in the day, and I'm like, if people start drawing like this, if people start meeting this bar, which is really naive, right? Like Travis as a draftsman is like exceptional,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In as much as Adam Hughes as a draftsman is exceptional, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the one thing Travis could never, I don't think I could ever look at any of his cover work and go like, memorable, right? Like, oh yeah,
Travis. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
like that's freaking awesome. That guy really knows how to put together a cover. And I
Right.
think, when it was successful, when someone, I looked it up, like I looked up a bunch of his covers, and when it was the most successful, at least that era of Travis, the era of Travis now, the style that he's utilizing is almost like it's almost unidentifiable that it's Travis doing it. He's
I
doing a
don't even
different
know what his
rendering
stuff
style.
looks like now.
You would never be able to tell unless number one, somebody told. Like if you have a picture in of Travis's work in your head right now,
Mhm.
and then you're like, I show you some of his current work, you're like, I don't see the connection there at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyway, that's not to say that it's bad. It's just not what I expect. Okay. So
Right.
anyway, my point is like when I think of the covers that he's done, not a ton of it stood out. And if you take a look at the ones that did stand out, the ones that made me go like, holy cow, number one, I remember it specifically because of the way something was rendered,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
level of draftsmanship and craftsmanship that went into it, but
Mhm.
not because it was a memorable cover. And when he did rock one that made you go like, oh, that's interesting, you weren't really reacting to Travis, you were reacting to Drew Struzan,
Mm.
right? Which is where where he'll do like the stacked heads and the figures
Right.
at the full figures at the bottom, and this
Right.
composition of people of like You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
in such a way where you get the protagonist, antagonist, and using something as a framing element, right?
Right. Right.
Pretty like standard Drew Struzan stuff, right?
Right.
And to
Right.
that end, so like rather than think of Travis as like, why aren't you doing a better version? Or if you're doing your take on a Drew Struzan thing, I ended up looking at a ton of Drew Struzan stuff. And even within his body of work, you're like going back to the the 3 point razor that I was just talking about. When his stuff is the most memorable is when he's doing, you know, simple idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you call it? Yeah, graphic in all of it, in the majority of its shapes, and then compels an emotion. That compels the emotion one. Sometimes it's hard to do that when you're doing the head stack,
Yeah, I can see that.
right? But it jumps into the amendment that you just mentioned earlier, which is um, compositionally it's strong.
Right.
He makes up for the emotion with composition,
Okay.
or like the design, right? The design
Right.
of the design of the covers or the paintings that he did.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah. But it does go into the amendment that I was talking about, which is like the guy just can flat out draw.
No doubt.
You know. Anyway, that was an interesting exercise. I did that for about 3 or 4
So
hours a week ago.
like looking at your 3 criteria, and you just added the amendment of composition,
Mhm.
is that a 4th criteria?
Not really, because it almost needs to go without saying that that composition, you have to have that in your back pocket,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Right.
Because it helps to inform on the compelling nature of the emotion, right? So in the case of the Superman cover with Martha Kent in the middle of something, compositionally and design wise, that's already built in. But you need to
Right.
compose it that way to compel an emotion. This goes back to like those scenes from like Citizen Kane, right? Like when you're looking up at somebody, it projects this emotion of like dominance.
Absolutely.
When you're looking down at somebody, it
Absolutely.
projects being submissive, right?
And
So
what
those kinds of very base, instinctual, right, emotions already built into that composition. So in order to compel the right sort of emotion, composition almost needs to be like,
Yes. And
woven in there.
that's what made that cover from Adam emotionally resonant,
Yeah.
was how he presented the information.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Because I'm trying to think of. I was looking up another person I was looking up because like, do I remember any Hellboy covers? Because as a
Mm.
draftsman, I love Mike Mignola.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I don't know of anybody who has deconstructed form, volume, light and shadow to the point now where he's even becoming a formula of himself. And that's not a knock. That's almost like, you know what you're doing, man. You
Right.
know your
Right.
shorthand already. And then when he ends up painting, it's another added layer of like, oh, look at the draftsmanship and craftsmanship of this person's body of work.
Right. Right.
But if you were to ask me, like, what Hellboy cover do you remember? And I'm like, nothing really stands out to me that makes me go like, oh, that one with the
Right. Right. I think
tentacle, you know?
when I think of his memorable covers, they're not Hellboy.
What do you remember?
That Legends of the Dark Knight cover he did,
Oh, sure.
that one was
Sure.
beast. The cover to the book he did with Walt with Wolverine in the Savage Land,
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Cosmic
that's an old
Odyssey
one.
covers. I
Yeah.
remember those.
Yeah. No,
But you're
that
right.
what do you call it one? I definitely remember that Batman. Do you
Yeah.
remember that all red Batman cover with like the skeleton, like the half of it turns into a skeleton?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So again, in the 3 point metric, in the 3 point razor, right? Graphic, simple in its concept,
Yeah.
right?
Actually,
Compels
yeah.
an emotion, you know?
My favorite Magnolia cover is a Dead Man cover he did.
I don't remember that. I don't remember
It's
his
a
dead man
very
anything.
it fits all your criteria.
Yeah.
You're looking at an old like a a Gothic, Southern Gothic house, but
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
the bay window with
Yeah.
ivy and stuff on the outside,
Yeah.
and dead man's on the inside hanging upside down. And
Shit, I don't remember that. I have
I
to look it
want
up.
to say Chiarello colored it
Sure.
just beautifully, like just
Yeah.
very simple, like muted green, dark greens,
Sure.
all on the outside, and dead man bright red.
Sure. I think that's why, and rest in peace, Tim Sale. I think that's the reason why a lot of people react so favorably to Tim's work
Oh, that's a
is
good
because
observation.
his, what do you call it? His hidden, like, so here's the thing, like, from a craftsman perspective, Tim maximized the way he drew, right? Which,
Mhm.
like, it's not to say somebody will ever go like, oh, like the way Tim renders X, right?
Mhm.
Is the top example of anything, right? And again, that's not throwing shade at Tim. I think he has a clear understanding of that. But within the
Sure.
context of what he could draw, from Batman to Catwoman to Superman, right? Like, he knew where his strengths were. And it was
Mhm.
clear that, or at least to me, it was pretty clear. Again, looking up a lot of his work, I was like, I remember those covers from him, especially those, because you brought up Chiarello, especially those Catwoman covers that he did,
Yes. Yes.
where he was doing, when he was doing sort of his riff on Grau,
Right.
And I remember thinking like, geez, Tim is on another level. And I was like, oh, right. Cause he was looking at all the Grau stuff, which is
Right.
like very graphic, simple in its presentation, compelling in its emotion.
Right. Right.
And so that's another example where I can clearly remember a lot of the covers that he has, a
Yeah.
lot of the
Yeah. Yeah.
covers that he did.
Mhm.
I think maybe, um, we're just going to end up talking about covers for the next 5 minutes, but I've really got to go because I've got a meeting to get into.
Okay. Okay.
That's it. That's the 12 o'clock mark. We'll pick this up again later, but I think that's pretty good for now.
Totally.
All right.
Totally.
Shut up, John Amore. I'm sick of hearing your feedback. We're going to run the bumper. Thank you for listening, everybody. Here we
Thank
go.
you.
We're going to do the outro now.
This is the INKPULP podcast. This is the INKPULP podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.